Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a new framework for multilingual LLM guardrails. It's called DuoGuard. You've probably heard about, the potential risks if large language models aren't, properly monitored. It seems like a lot of work has gone into safety for English language LLMs, but multilingual safety is, well, feels like it's lagging behind a bit.
Yeah, that's true. As LLMs are becoming more widely used, we need to make sure they're safe across different languages. And that's where this DuoGuard system comes in, aiming to train those multilingual guardrails.
Okay, so when we say multilingual guardrails, what does that actually mean?
Think of them as smaller models that work alongside the main LLM. They're like content moderators, flagging any potentially harmful content.
So what's the biggest challenge in creating these multilingual guardrails then?
The biggest hurdle is the lack of safety data in languages other than English. There's tons in English, but far less in other languages. And DuoGuard tries to get around this with a two-player system.
A two-player system?
Yeah, imagine like a generator and a guardrail model, and they're constantly going back and forth.
That's interesting. So how does this two-player system actually work?
Well, you have this generator model that's designed to create tricky content.
Tricky how?
Tricky in the sense that it's designed to try to slip past the guardrail, and it does this in different languages. Then the guardrail model steps in and analyzes this content, and as it does that, it learns from its mistakes and gets better at identifying those harmful outputs.
So they're both basically like constantly training against each other, pushing each other to improve.
Exactly.
Is there like a specific name for this kind of a system?
Yeah. It's actually known as a minimax game in game theory. The generator wants to maximize the chance of fooling the guardrail, and obviously the guardrail is trying to minimize those chances. And the creators of DuoGuard, they actually proved mathematically that this system, it moves towards what's called a Nash equilibrium. Basically, both models get to a point where their performance is as good as it can be.
That's fascinating. So it's not just theory, it's actually, proven to work. But did they actually test this out, in a real world kind of setting?
They did. They tested DuoGuard on 6 different multilingual safety benchmarks. And what they found was that it was consistently beating similar sized models by over 20% in performance.
Wow. Even with that limited data we talked about, that's really impressive. What about efficiency? How did it compare to other models in that regard?
Well, it turns out DuoGuard is pretty efficient too. It actually outperformed much larger models by an average of 10%. And get this, it was 4.5 times faster than some of the others.
4.5 times faster. That's a pretty significant speed up.
And there's another interesting thing. The data that was generated by that small 0.5B generator model, well, they found that could actually be used to train larger, different models, and it still led to better performance.
So the small models is helping the bigger models get better.
Yeah, it's kind of like a weak to strong generalization thing, they called it.
So it seems like the quality of that training data is, really crucial here. Did the researchers have any insights on that front?
Yeah, they actually highlighted the importance of data filtering. They found that just throwing all the generated data, even if it's relevant, wasn't effective.
So it's not just about quantity, it's about quality, right?
Exactly. They were saying that it created noise and hindered the guardrail model's learning. So they focused on carefully selecting the most challenging samples, and that's what led to much better performance.
Can you give us an example of how that works, like how they filter the data?
Sure. They actually included an example comparing a filtered and unfiltered sample in German.
Oh, interesting.
So the unfiltered sample, it had these really obvious curse words. It made it super easy to classify as harmful, right?
Right, yeah.
But the filtered example, well, that was trickier. It used more nuanced language, culturally specific stuff, and it was deliberately ungrammatical.
So by filtering the data, they were making sure the guardrail model was exposed to like a wider range of potentially harmful content, right?
Yeah. So it becomes more robust and capable of identifying those subtle forms of harm that might otherwise slip through.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of DuoGuard, the two-player system, the importance of day filtering. What else did the researchers highlight in their findings?
Well, they were very transparent about the data sources they used. It was a diverse range. Some focused on safety and toxicity, while others had more general content.
So they were really trying to cover all their bases, huh? Can you give some examples of the specific data sets?
Sure, they used data sets like Beavertail and ToxiChat, but also some from medical and legal contexts.
Medical and legal. That seems a bit out of left field. Why include those?
Well, even in those fields, certain keywords or phrases could be flagged by a guardrail. Think about it. You wouldn't want a medical diagnosis to be misidentified as harmful content, right?
I see. So it's about context. They're making sure the model can differentiate between what's truly harmful and what's just sensitive information.
Exactly. They wanted to make sure it was contextually aware.
So this real-world data was combined with the synthetic data from the two-player system.
Right. It was all part of creating a more comprehensive training environment. Interestingly, the initial data set had a big imbalance in terms of language representation, like over 80% was in English.
Ah, that English-centric bias. It pops up everywhere. How do they deal with that?
Well, that's where the synthetic data generation was really key. Using the two-player system, they could generate more balanced data across different languages.
So they're using the synthetic data to fill in those gaps and reduce the reliance on those English-heavy data sets.
Smart. Let's get back to those 6 multilingual safety benchmarks they used. What were they looking for specifically in those tests?
It was a mixture of established and newer benchmarks. Some like XS Test and ToxaChat are pretty well known, but others like RTPLX and XSafety are designed specifically for multilingual safety. And all of these benchmarks were testing DuoGuard's ability to, what, identify things like hate speech.
Yeah, and toxic language. Even more subtle forms of harm.
Okay. And from what we've discussed, it sounds like DuoGuard was consistently outperforming the other models, even while being smaller and more efficient. Did they go into more detail about their data filtering process?
They did. They really emphasized that just including all the generated data, even the relevant stuff, wasn't the best way to go. It actually created too much noise, and that ended up hurting the model's learning.
So it's really about giving the model the right kind of data, not just more data. How do they go about figuring out which data was actually the most valuable?
Well, they prioritized the data that successfully fooled the guardrail while still maintaining the desired level of either harm or safety. It's those challenging examples that really push the model to improve.
It's like giving a student those extra practice problems,
Yeah,
like the ones they struggle with. It helps them get a better grasp of the material.
that's a good analogy.
This has been a really fascinating look into DuoGuard. You know, this whole concept of like a two-player system, this back and forth between the generator and the guardrail. It's pretty fascinating. It feels almost evolutionary, you know?
It is. It really mirrors how we learn as humans, right? We're
Yeah.
always being exposed to new information and making mistakes, and then we adjust our understanding based on those mistakes.
So this DuoGuard system is basically doing the same thing. Like it's mimicking that natural process of learning and adapting.
Yeah, exactly. By putting the generator and guardrail against each other, they kind of force each other to evolve. The generator learns to craft these more sophisticated attacks, and then the guardrail learns to defend against a wider range of threats.
And in the end, you get a much stronger, more adaptable guardrail model.
And that's what leads to those impressive results we were talking about. Higher accuracy, faster processing, better generalization across languages. But you have to keep in mind that the landscape of language and how it's used to cause harm is constantly evolving.
That's true. New slang terms pop up, cultural contexts shift. It makes you wonder, what does this all mean for, the future of LLM safety?
Well, as LLMs become more advanced, the ways they can be exploited or misused will also become more sophisticated. This research on DuoGuard, it really highlights that ensuring LLM safety isn't a one-time fix. It's got to be an ongoing process.
There's an ongoing challenge. How do we make sure these safety measures can keep up with, how fast LLMs are evolving?
I think ongoing research and collaboration are key. We've got to stay ahead of the curve, anticipate those new threats, and constantly refine our approaches to LLM safety.
This deep dive into DuoGuard has been incredibly insightful. It's really given us a glimpse into the cutting edge of LLM safety research.
It's definitely encouraging to see the progress being made.
And for our listeners, I hope this deep dive has sparked your interest in the world of LLM guardrails and giving you a better understanding of why they're so important. Until next time.